When the Bond Minicar first appeared in 1949, it was less of a car and more of a symbol of post-war scarcity turned into innovation. Britain was emerging from rationing. Steel was limited, and the government encouraged manufacturers to produce smaller, fuel-efficient vehicles that used fewer resources. Into this backdrop, Lawrie Bond, an aviation engineer who had previously designed lightweight wartime vehicles, unveiled his vision: a tiny three-wheel microcar with aircraft-inspired construction, minimal steel use, and a motorcycle engine. Part scooter, part enclosed cyclecar, the Bond Minicar appealed immediately to budget-conscious motorists who wanted protection from the rain without paying for a full-size car. It was a clever bridge between austerity and mobility. The early Bond Minicar's aluminium body stood out in a market dominated by steel body designs. Aluminium was still relatively accessible as wartime stocks remained surplus, and Bond exploited this advantage. The Minicar's construction was intentionally simplistic: a lightweight frame, motorcycle-like controls, and an engine that produced modest power but astonishing fuel efficiency. The result was a machine that weighed so little that it could achieve extraordinary mileage, upwards of 70 to 80 miles per gallon under the right conditions. Buyers who couldn't afford a Ford Anglia or Morris Minor now had an alternative that offered independence, albeit in a more fragile and idiosyncratic package. Economics were the greatest force behind its initial popularity. Post-war Britain imposed high purchase taxes on luxury cars, but three-wheelers categorized as motorcycles escaped these heavy levies. The Bond Minicar, therefore, had a decisive price advantage, often costing less than half a conventional car. This meant that it attracted not only frugal families, but also elderly drivers, rural commuters, and young enthusiasts looking for personal transport without financial strain. For many, the Minicar was their first step into the world of automobiles, and they accepted its quirks, such as minimal weatherproofing and narrow track and modest upper performance, as part of the charm. Though primitive compared to contemporary cars, the Minicar had a surprisingly wide appeal. Some early versions even lacked a reverse gear due to the motorcycle engine, forcing owners to physically push the car backwards. Yet these limitations didn't significantly affect the Minicar's reputation in the early 1950s. Instead, the public admired its simplicity, ease of maintenance, and lack of pretension. Bond Cars Limited continued refining the Minicar with incremental improvements across multiple marques, addressing issues like stability, comfort, and engine reliability. Each update sustained interest and kept the Minicar relevant in an evolving market. By the mid-1950s, the Bond Minicar was no longer a novelty. It was a recognized presence on British roads. Newspapers referred to it as a mechanical umbrella, a protective shell for those who could not yet afford the real jump into automotive ownership. But beneath the appreciation lay a structural weakness. The microcar boom was tied to economic necessity. As Britain slowly recovered and affluence increased, the Bond Minicar would need more than just frugality to remain competitive. It had entered the market perfectly, but its survival would depend on whether it could adapt when austerity faded. Entering the late 1950s, Bond Cars Limited faced a world moving toward greater expectations of comfort and reliability. Competitors like the BMW Isetta, Heinkel Cabine, and Messerschmitt KR200 began offering more sophisticated microcars with enclosed cabins, better suspension, and improved engineering. Bond responded by upgrading the Minicar's structure, adding better weather protection, stronger frames, and more refined interiors. The Minicar MKC, MKD, MKE, and MKF represented the evolution of a concept trying to keep pace with a rapidly maturing automobile industry. But each improvement increased cost, threatening the very value proposition that had made the Minicar popular. One of the Minicar's defining characteristics, its three-wheeled layout, was becoming a liability. Although it kept the vehicle classified as a motorcycle for tax purposes, it also meant reduced stability and limited performance compared to four-wheeled rivals. As conventional small cars like the Austin A30, Morris Minor 1000, and Ford Popular dropped in price due to mass production, the Minicar's once massive price advantage shrank rapidly. Consumers now viewed it not as a clever economical alternative, but as an outdated compromise. What had once been a badge of ingenuity was slowly becoming a sign of being behind the times. Bond did achieve some engineering successes during this era. The introduction of Villiers two-stroke engines gave the Minicar better acceleration and greater reliability. Later versions experimented with improvements like electric start, enhanced braking systems, and even semi-automatic transmissions. The MKF, launched in the early 1960s, represented the minicar approaching its peak technical refinement. But even this polished version struggled against a seismic shift happening in Britain's automobile market. Small four-wheel cars had become affordable to the masses, and buyers expected more comfort, safety, and performance than microcars could reasonably deliver. Legislation also began squeezing the microcar industry. Insurance classifications shifted, tax policies evolved, and more rigorous safety standards began looming on the horizon. Although three-wheelers weren't immediately outlawed or heavily burdened, the environment was clearly moving toward favoring conventional cars. Bond Cars Limited found itself trapped between rising production costs and shrinking demand. Moreover, their facilities were relatively small-scale compared to industry giants like BMC and Ford, which would produce cars faster, cheaper, and with higher quality control. The microcar, once a necessity, was drifting into obsolescence. By the early 1960s, the writing was on the wall. Sales of the Bond Minicar were slipping despite incremental enhancements, and the company recognized that survival would require a bold shift. The era of ultralight, ultra-budget motoring was ending. To compete in a changing landscape, Bond would need a new design philosophy. The minicar was iconic, but antiquated. The next phase would not be about patching an old concept. It would be about replacing it. As the 1960s progressed, Bond rolled out the Bond 875, an advanced, more powerful, and more conventional-looking three-wheeler using a Hillman Imp engine. This signaled a clear shift. The company knew the minicar cyclecar-style engineering had reached its limit. The 875 was faster, more robust, and aimed squarely at the Reliant Regal segment, Britain's dominant three-wheeler. In comparison, the minicar looked increasingly outdated. Its aluminum shell, scooter-like simplicity, and small two-stroke engines belonged to another era. Bond did not terminate the minicar abruptly. Instead, it faded quietly as new models consumed the marketing budget and factory resources. Production finally ceased in 1966, officially ending a 17-year run that had defined the microcar era for thousands of British motorists. But the end was far from dramatic. The minicar was discontinued simply because the world no longer needed it. The economy was strong, imported small cars were affordable, and even working-class families could aim for a used Austin, Ford, or Vauxhall instead of buying a purpose-built microcar. Infrastructure improved, expectations shifted, and the modest 200cc, 250cc engines of minicar no longer made sense for an increasingly mobile, modern Britain. Yet the minicar left a considerable legacy. It had democratized motoring at a time when ownership was restricted by cost, taxation, and material shortages. It also pioneered concepts of lightweight design long before modern efficiency standards were imagined. Many engineering enthusiasts later praised the minicar for its simplicity and clever packaging. Collectors today admire it as a relic of post-war resilience, an age when necessity bred creativity, and when transportation didn't need to be fast or luxurious to be meaningful. A functioning minicar at classic rallies now draws fascinated crowds who marvel at its aircraft-like construction and charming fragility. The demise of the minicar also taught the microcar industry a difficult truth. The market for ultra-small vehicles is cyclical, dependent on economic hardship. When times are tough, microcars appear brilliant. When prosperity returns, they fade. Bond Cars Limited would eventually be absorbed into Reliant in 1969, marking another symbolic moment. The company that had competed with Reliant for years ultimately merged into the very brand that had overshadowed its three-wheeled offerings. Today, the Bond Minicar stands as a reminder of a unique chapter in automotive history, one where creativity triumphed over scarcity, and where a tiny three-wheeled aluminium shell became a lifeline for thousands of British families. Its downfall was not caused by failure, but by success. Britain succeeded economically, and the minicar's purpose evaporated. The car story is a journey from necessity to nostalgia, from post-war austerity to classic car admiration. In the grand timeline of motoring history, the Bond Minicar may have been small, but its impact was enormous.